Hello, this is Gerald Johan van Waas and the educational channel of demonstrations regarding the theory of the sounding form, the development of the letters and the letter combinations, and also about the structure that is underlying it. I was already explaining in the last video, and the structure I will continue to explain. The exact reason why, okay, there are a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why this works, why the letter combinations really direct you into the directions that they are intended to have, is because it is rooted in an order that is like a numerological order with some behaviorism that is departing from there. We follow these rules unconsciously, and they will therefore they will also match the letters and letter combinations because we use unconsciously. Okay, I will also explain why it is also deliberately, but that's another chapter. In this video I will explain the order, how this order in logic is built up. And I made a comparison that we start our whole thinking processes from a certain starting point of counting. Let's say, let's count the apples. Let's say we count an apple. We count objects. We try to have it as much, the world perspective is, we try to focus on objects. That's the most countable thing, is an object. And the object that fits best with this idea is the apple. So we start from the apple. We have 2 apples, and then of course we already know, okay, we can start counting apples. At a certain point we have a pear, and it is no longer an apple, and we don't know what to do with it. So we have to make and rearrange this idea that we can count with it, not just as a counting, but also dealing with the differences. The differences, how can we have them together? We need to add them into a category. At this point we don't know yet how to do that with the categories. We are in the learning process, but we will do that already. The category here for apple and pears is the fruit. So we have, with 2 apples and a pear, we can count them in different ways. We can count them as one from the definition that we have already. So that's our thinking, that's our number 1, from what our perspective is. So I make a difference with the numbers themselves and the number 1 of our perspective. The number 1 of our perspective is the idea that we use to make an order. The idea here is fruit. So with fruit, 2 apples and a pear, we have just together it's 1. So we have 1 logic in it, it's fruit. If we count it with a comparison of counting itself and the idea that we have the calculation that we say, okay, how many differences do we see here? We only see 2 differences. So with 2 apples and a pear, we have the number 2 in this case. So these are the variations that we already notice. If we just have the counting itself, we have the number 3. But we need all these ways of thinking. We always need to go back to the definition, which is now fruit, so that we can adapt our way of thinking and our way of making an order. And that's more or less how our language works to guide us in that direction, because with the same number of 3 fruits, we can have 3 kinds of numbers and 3 kinds of calculations, or 3 kinds of ways to treat it. And that's how it works in language, as I said. And so we had the definition, or 1, we had the variations in the categories, but categories I will talk later. That is now the number 2, and we had a neutral number, which was simply the counting. So what do we need here? So with the useful definition, which is here 1, this is embedded in the idea of what we have as the letter A. Anything that is acceptable within this definition, with a workable variation, we can still add it up and add it to it, and we will count it as well. We will count it into 1 category, so within 1 whole, or we count it as neutral numbers. The conditions that we use to say, okay, here it is still workable, are compared to the letter T. The T is actually the conditions of our definition of 1, so that we can still treat it as 1. So the T is actually the real definition of 1, because of the elements that we say, okay, here we can use the elements. If we find elements that don't fit, we will have to break down our thinking process, and we use the letter K. But I will explain the same thing, just a little bit more clear, just to show you that the number 1 is not a steady, very steady. It can derive, it can change a little bit, but we use it. We use it, and we build up our whole logic from number 1 to number 9 from there. So when we start, it's a completely new process. We start from it, it is new, we define it already as A, and actually we're still searching and we try to match everything within that A. As soon as we say, okay, we have more of the same, we are sure that we can continue this way, and we define the number 1. From the number 1 we can also add variations, because also when we have variations and we notice the variations, we separate it slightly, the variations, but we still accept it. It's within our structure of 1. When the variations are a little bit doubtful if they still can be added into the same logic, it is the third stage of what I am building up. So every number has these 3 stages. That's what I will repeat a couple of times. The 3 stages of each number will be needed for the letters. So you have a category of the new number, the additions where you can add more of the same, and the doubtful position, which you hear in the first level is the K. So in a way we could say with the T there we already had some doubts if we could still use it, and we can calculate this difference by using numbers like 1.1, 1.3 and so on. This kind of counting is, I call that doubtful counting, because you can't use it. You have to use a norm, you have to use a definition, and then you can distinguish what hangs together, what does not hang together. So the 1.1, and so the after the comma might be useful on the calculator, but in making definitions and in letters it will be a categorization which is absolutely only saying that we have doubts about it, and we don't know where to put it. If we go back into history and we see to the ancient Egyptians, they didn't use these kinds of calculations. So if they had a cake and they want to divide it by 15, they wouldn't divide it into 15, but they would divide it into practical areas. So it is much more practical to have, for instance, to use other kinds of calculations. The calculations for the Egyptians that were practical were the calculations where the divisions in 3 were useful. Just like here you had 3 regions. These 3 regions are needed, and then divided in that kind of categories. It's a whole different system to work with, but it's much more. If you have a cake and you want to have it in, just try to do that and put it into 15. It will not be practical. So it will be much more practical to say, okay, how can I divide 15 into a workable form? It's much so to put something in 3 is still useful. Put something in 2 is useful. So that we can use, that we can count with practically. So here we don't have a grip on it, so that's not useful. That's absolutely not useful in our way of calculating with letters. But before we can come to the number 2, then from 1 to 2, it will not be that easy of going from A to T to K, and you say, okay, now I'm sure I have already something different. I have already something that is equally different than my own way of thinking. Now also there we have to follow up of certain rules to define the number 2. We have defined the number 1, but the new number 1 has to be defined as well. When will number 2 fit with number 1? It will again go through this whole process. what is it? This definition of one was already tested. It was tested with a T to say like, okay, with these features, I can still can add it. And with this, when there were too many elements that didn't add up, okay, I had already some doubts. I had to make adaptations. So this kind of thinking process will happen with the before you come to from A to B will happen there as well. And I will explain the difference between the first region of 1 and the second region of 2, or A, T and K, and U, L and B. I will explain what will happen and how you have to calculate it. So what's the underlying structure to understand these 6 letters. Actually, in the A, there was already, there should have been or should be actually already some doubt. If you learned well what the definition of your own one is, there were doubtful moments already. And so we had a definition based upon our experience in already in T, that we said, okay, we have already some differences, we have already some features, but we can still fit it in. We can still fit it in our logic, and that's actually only after having discovered the T that we are sure that A works. So only because of the T, the A works. We started, or we should start actually in a doubt in A by putting it into a process and say like, okay, can we always use it? The A doesn't realize that it's new. We go into the world and we try to adapt everything. No, it's good to have everything that we do tested. So with the new additions come to it, we test it with a T, and we have to adapt something in it with a K. So the central vision that we have, our first central vision, the number 1, it has also a certain doubt in it. This doubt process is the same process that gets you further into the logic of communications, into the logic of calculations and divisions, just like the nature and life is calculating to grow. It has a doubtful moment there as well. This doubt in the number, in the T, in the T is actually changed into a certainty. If you compare it, so the first region, the 1, is a centralized vision. That's my vision. So I have a centralized vision of A. When I add new elements, I add them somewhere in the blue circle there. And it is already slightly off center, but I can still add it. It's still within my range of A into the blue zone. I can use it, so I changed the slight doubt, which is there already, into certainty. So I use all the differences, and I can still use all the differences in favor of my central vision. That's my second position. The same thing happens on the next level. So what do we do with the T? We say, yes, I can use it for my central vision. So when I use T, like the, or at, or even a verb that ends with T, like you have it in some languages, you actually confirm, yes, I can use it. I can use it into my central vision. What do you have in the next level? Then you also say, oh yes, I can use it to become more. Because from 1 to 2, it is more than 1. There's a second vision as possible as well. And with the L, yes, I can use it to become more. And the last category, the last evolution, the last part where you still can continue the same vision is the K, and it is already at the edge of, can I still use it, yes or no? In its totality, I cannot use it because there's a large part that needs already adaptation, that goes already somewhere else. So the last stage of one, so you can have it as a string actually. This string is going from A to T to K, and it is with a half notes almost, like the K is already going through the next note. It is a doubtful position, and you can only use the K well with some caution and adaptation, then it will work. The same thing is at the third stage of the number 2, the B. You can only use it well when you have the right adaptation, when you use the right adaptation. It's a bit the other way around. With the K you can only use it with the adaptation, and here the B is about adaptation actually. It is already adapting, and that's the way how it is treated. So the center here from 1 and 2 is the number from the number 1 it is T. That's the center position, and that actually says, okay, I have the elements. The elements are in 1, and they're also in 1 dimension. In 1 dimension, in 1 point, I can notice the difference of the elements. What will happen in the next level? From U, L and B, the center position is there, the L, and it is about formation. It is not the elements we have already, but the elements are put together, so they are formed, they are forming themselves, they are in formation in the number 2, so also in 2 dimensions. So I hope this is clear enough that it is already helpful to know and realize the structure beneath the letters. I'm not fantasizing these combinations of letters at all. I am just using the theory and interpreting it in whatever situation I notice in the certain letter combinations, and I just simply follow the rules in my way, because I understand what is going on underneath. What is going on there, and I know it intuitively by heart actually, and that's why I sometimes go through it quite intuitively as well, or it seems more intuitively as it actually is. It is a reasoning that I use there as well, and this reasoning is based upon the structure which you have now in this video. From the first levels I have already some explanation. Anyhow, thanks for watching. This was Gerald van Waas. You can see a list of demonstrations and a list of some theoretical associations as well there, and you can go back to certain videos, so it's more easy to use a certain list there. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to keep informed or see more updates. Thanks again. Bye bye.